Good morning, I'm Maiki Oreta and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. An analyst from HSBC says the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas will not cut interest rates just yet, despite the slower than expected inflation rate in September. HSBC is a global banking giant that tracks economic trends across the ASEAN. Experts warn of a possible economic crisis if the value-added tax is removed. And U.S. President Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas have agreed on the first phase of a peace framework in Gaza. First, let's take a look at how global financial markets performed overnight. U.S. stocks are mixed, with technology shares leading the gains. With no new economic data during the government shutdown, investors are turning to the Federal Reserve's latest meeting minutes for clues on the outlook for interest rates through to the year end.
And really, it's just the market is continuing to digest what's happening in D.C., the higher probability that we're moving towards the shutdown ending, and really kind of looking ahead to what the consumer's doing, what the Fed's going to do. And, we're kind of getting back into that mode where most things, other than the employment number looking a little shaky, look pretty good when it comes to the U.S. economy.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average is flat. The S&P 500 rises more than 0.5%, about 0.6%, and the Nasdaq up by 1.1%. Over in Europe, markets close higher. The UK's FTSE 100 up by 0.7%, Germany's DAX up by 0.9%, and France's CAC 40 up by 1.1%. With inflation easing in September, an economist from HSBC says it's still too early for the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to cut interest rates. In an economic briefing, HSBC ASEAN economist Aris Dakanay says that the central bank is expected to gradually lower rates until it reaches a terminal level of 4.5% by the first quarter of 2026. Dakanay notes that this outlook holds if rice prices remain stable. He adds that the September inflation result sets the stage for a 25 basis point cut in the fourth quarter, likely in December rather than this week. Citibank and a Manila branch also expects the BSP to deliver a total of 50 basis points in rate cuts through to two 25 basis point adjustments, one in December and another in the first quarter of 2026. Economists and tax experts warn that scrapping the value-added tax, or VAT, could trigger a fiscal, even an economic crisis. The Bureau of Internal Revenue reports that VAT collections of 487 billion pesos in the first 8 months of 2025. Foundation for Economic Freedom President Calixto Chiquiamco warns that abolishing the VAT would plunge the country into a fiscal crisis, driving up inflation, curtailing government spending on social services, and threatening a credit rating downgrade. Cavite Representative Francisco Barzaga has filed a bill seeking to remove the 12% VAT on goods and services, citing its burden on low and middle-income households amid high inflation and rising living costs. Barzaga says revenue shortfalls can be offset through wealth taxes and higher excise duties on non-essential and luxury goods, including cigarettes, alcohol, vehicles, and gambling activities. The Court of Appeals freezes another set of bank accounts linked to the massive flood control corruption scandal, bringing the total value of restrained assets to 4.4 billion pesos. That's according to the Anti-Money Laundering Council. The latest freeze order covers 12 accounts tied to persons of interest and one entity allegedly used for ghost projects, though account holders were not identified. In the past month alone, 5 separate freeze orders have been issued, targeting more than 1,600 bank accounts, along with properties, vehicles, insurance policies, and e-wallets. Each order is valid for 20 days and may be extended for up to 6 months. The AMLC is also working with foreign counterparts to trace possible offshore funds connected to the case. The House Appropriation Panel's Budget Amendments Review Subcommittee cut several items under unprogrammed funds in the proposed 6.8 trillion peso national budget for 2026. Funding for local infrastructure will no longer come from the 80.86 billion pesos SAGIP program, which has been reduced to 45 billion pesos and now limited to foreign-assisted projects. The 6.7 billion allocation for public health emergency allowances has also been removed as it is considered fully settled as of 2025. Now, unprogrammed funds, which can only be used if there are excess revenues or foreign funding, stand at 250 billion pesos in the proposed spending plan. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro maintains that these funds remain crucial for emergencies, despite calls from lawmakers to scrap them. The Bureau of Customs is investigating the luxury vehicles surrendered by former Public Works Bulacan Assistant District Engineer Bryce Hernandez to the Independent Commission for Infrastructure. Chris Bendijo, Deputy Chief of Staff at the Office of the Customs Commissioner, says the agency will look into the taxes paid on the vehicles. Bendijo adds that they are also evaluating the responses of customs personnel who were issued show cause orders over their alleged links to the smuggling of luxury cars. But he clarifies their investigation covers only goods imported into the country and not the total ill-gotten wealth of personalities linked to the flood control scandal. The Bureau of Internal Revenue files a complaint against so-called flood control contractors Curly and Sara Discaya. According to the Bureau's internal findings, the couple owes 7.1 billion pesos in unpaid taxes from 2018 through to 2021. This includes unpaid income tax, taxes from their divestment in other companies, and excise taxes on undeclared luxury vehicles. The BIR also notes that taxes paid from their government contracts and personal assets based on a lifestyle check do not match their declared income. The BIR says that regardless of any criminal penalties imposed, the Discayas will still have to pay all taxes due to the government. Still on the Bureau of Internal Revenue's tax evasion case against the Discayas, BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr. tells BNC's Agenda that the Discayas may use their confiscated properties as payment in case they fail to pay their unpaid taxes and related penalties.
Pwede po nating habulin yung mga iba't ibang ari-arian nila kung hindi pa po, kung meron pa. Pangalawa, yung isang immediate effect po niyan, hindi sila makakakuha ng tax clearance mula sa BIR at ang ibig pong sabihin yan ay hindi na sila makakapag-participate sa mga bidding ng mga government projects dahil isa po sa requirement ang tax clearance coming from BIR para makapag-participate sa mga public bidding sa mga proyektong ito. Tapos yun, sisikapin pa rin po natin habulin lahat ng mga ari-arian po nila at yung liability po naman na yan hindi nawawala at siguro titingnan din natin kung yung mga na-confiscate or yung mga sinurrender na mga properties na yan ay pwedeng gamiting pambayad sa kanilang mga buwis.
Lumagi also says they are investigating whether someone inside the BIR may have covered for the Discayas. The fallout from the flood control corruption scandal continues to reverberate across government. Over 1.7 trillion in market value has been wiped out in just 3 weeks, and public confidence in infrastructure spending is shattered. Now, the House is eyeing reforms to make private sector inspection mandatory in all public works projects to close loopholes and stop corruption before it even starts. Joining us now is Bicol Saro Representative and House Infrastructure Committee Co-Chair Attorney Terry Redon. Good morning, Congressman Redon, and thank you for being here with us.
Good morning, Maiki. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Congressman Redon, your committee's hearings were suspended just 2 weeks ago after 2 sessions, with the probe now under the Independent Commission, ICI. Based on what you've uncovered, where are we in this case? Are we at the beginning? Are we at the middle? Are we at the end? What do you think? Where are we?
Well, I think we're already at the middle to the end of it. No? So we've already been able to identify so many personalities involved in the flood control corruption scandal. We have been able to identify legislators. We've been able to identify DPWH officials contractor. But more importantly, and this was the most important finding in the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee, we were also able to identify executive officials, which were supposedly absent in the first few hearings, but had been unraveled during the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearings. And I think the ICI is also looking at them as well, particularly because they've been releasing immigration lookout bulletin orders against the high-level executive officials as well.
Yeah. Okay. Based on the early hearings, some have noted that some of these are outright ghost projects. They seem to be isolated, but the substandard or overpriced projects are widespread. Is that how you see things? And what are the other patterns that have emerged?
Well, the admission of overpriced and substandard projects was made by DPWH officials, no? Particularly those in Bulacan, and that they had stated that because biddings were rigged and that because they were basically calling the shots at the level of the district, they were able to basically determine how the prices will be, how the costs will be. Which is why I think one of the more important interventions that need to be made would be including the private sector, particularly engineering design firms, in project inspections over the course of project implementation.
That's right. You've proposed that the private sector take part in auditing and inspecting the infrastructure projects. Do you suggest this at every phase of the construction?
I think every phase, particularly at every moment in which the contractor would want to bill government, I think the private sector should be able to make parallel inspections on the projects that are being implemented by the DPWH. I think what we had seen in the hearings is that we cannot just surrender the inspections to the DPWH alone, particularly if engineering districts had in fact been compromised, like what we had seen in Bulacan.
Yeah, the DPWH can't police itself. Will these independent engineers have real authority, or will they just have advisory roles?
No, I think they have to give the go-ahead and make a determination on whether the actual phase of implementation was faithful to the actual design and whether the specifications for the project, particularly the materials that had been used, had been faithful to the original design. So I think their intervention will be indispensable, particularly on whether or not the contractor will in fact be paid.
Yeah, they need to make sure they're faithful to the specs and the design. Talking about accountability, should lawmakers be required to publicly disclose and sign off on every insertion or amendment they introduce to the national budget? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that's an innovation that we would want to see, and I think I've heard the members of the appropriations panel of the House proposing similar interventions as well. And I think this adds to the transparency and accountability mechanisms that we would want to place into the budget. So at whichever stage of the budget process in which a legislator, congressman, or senator would want to insert or amend or make an initiative, particularly for their own districts or particularly for their own advocacies, they should be able to place their name onto the projects that they would want to insert or make an initiative on for the next budget.
On the congressional front, leadership change from House Speaker Martin Romualdez to Boji D, that marked a major political shift. How does this change affect the tone and the dynamic of Congress, especially when it comes to pursuing accountability in this probe?
Well, I think we've seen House Speaker Boji D personally deliver the Infrastructure Committee documents, transcripts, and evidence to the ICI. So I think that's a very specific commitment of the new leadership towards accountability, transparency, and making sure that whoever it is that may be involved in the flood control corruption will in fact be brought to justice. No? So I think that was a very significant step by Speaker Bojidi going to the ACI himself.
Speaking of justice, we've taken that very difficult step towards good governance by calling out the massive corruption that happens every day, with high-ranking officials mentioned. The great expectation now is for high-ranking officials to be jailed. Do you think that this is going to happen, Congressman?
Well, I think the ICI has been doing the most important steps at this point to build the cases against everyone who had been named, who had been involved in flood control corruption. So they have been requesting the ILBOs, which I stated earlier, the Immigration Lookout Bulletin Orders, against each and every person that had been named in testimonies and affidavits in the Blue Ribbon Committee in the Senate, in the House Infrastructure Committee. I think the request is pending with the DOJ. So I think we would wait as to when the Bureau of Immigration will actually issue the ILBOs that have been requested by the ICI.
Okay, stepping back, looking at the bigger picture, the business community is deeply concerned about this. While we're trying to attract foreign investment, none of what's been appearing in the news about the Philippines has been welcoming. SEC Chair Francis Lim says that the flood control scandal has already wiped out 1.7 trillion pesos, that's trillion, in market value at the Philippine Stock Exchange, sending a clear message that corruption is a massive economic risk. What do you say to investors that now see corruption as an economic risk and not just a political one? Yeah.
Well, I think corruption is a risk wherever it may be. No, but I think we have to be very clear on what Chairman Lim had actually stated. If you look at the charts relating to the PSEI, it's not exactly just about corruption in the Philippines as to why you have a weakening of the index. If you go back like a year, it has almost been the same situation that we find ourselves in. No? So I think he needs to clarify the very bombastic statements that he had made that corruption is a weapon of what do you call it, like a destruction of wealth, no?
Yeah.
Massive destruction of wealth, no? Because I think it is more than that. It is also more about, a weakening economy, which has been compounded, to be frank, by the corruption scandal that we are finding ourselves in.
Right. It's a difficult environment globally and locally. But yes, it is being compounded by the massive corruption scandals. In any case, what can we do to restore investor confidence? What's Congress going to do to restore investor confidence?
Well, firstly, I think the most important point would be to make sure that actual accountability is ensured by government. So ICI and all law enforcement should make sure that high-level officials that are involved actually get charged and actually get convicted. And second would be to basically initiate reforms in the budget and in the project implementation process. So I think the discussions relating to identification and naming of proponents for projects should contribute to the transparency processes that we would want to see in the budget process. And secondly, the private sector interventions, inspections, is something which I think the private sector and investors would most definitely welcome moving forward.
Yeah, we are all looking forward to accountability and transparency. Thank you, Attorney Ridon, Bicol Sara Rep and House Infrastructure Committee Chair.
Thank you, Maiki. Good morning.
We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's check out how Asian markets are doing this Thursday morning. Right now, the Nikkei 225 is sharply in the green, up by 1.3% in early trade. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index going the other way, lower by 0.8%. Shanghai's Composite up by 0.2%, and Singapore's Straits Times Index going in the opposite direction, down by 0.2%. Here at home, the market managed to stay afloat for a second straight session, even as investor confidence was shaken by the SEC's warning that the corruption scandal has wiped out 1.7 trillion pesos in market value in just the last 3 weeks. The PSE index rose 0.25% to 60.99, extending its modest rebound as traders went bargain hunting ahead of today's Bangko Sentral board monetary meeting. Now, turnover thinned to just 6.4 billion pesos, but most sectors ended higher. Mining and oil jumped nearly 5%, services up 2%, while financials and property fell. Market sentiment was helped by stronger labor numbers, unemployment easing to 3.9% in August, and by a peso that held firm against the 57 level to the dollar. But the bigger story is still the loss of confidence. SEC Chair Francis Lim said mounting corruption allegations, including the flood control scandal, have erased 1.7 trillion in market cap since mid-August. He warns that investors aren't fleeing because of weak earnings, they're fleeing because of weak integrity. When trust breaks down, capital dries up, he says. All eyes are now on the BSP's monetary board, which meets today, this afternoon. Economists are split on whether the central bank will cut rates again or pause to assess the economy's soft growth momentum. The BSP has already reduced policy rates by a total of 150 basis points since August of last year, bringing the benchmark rate to 5%. A dovish signal could help support sentiment, but analysts say rebuilding investor trust will take more than monetary easing. As the SEC puts it, corruption is a weapon of mass wealth destruction. Until the market sees accountability, not just rate cuts, the rebound may still be fragile. Taking a look at the PSE index this morning, as of 10:23, the main gauge is trading to the upside, slightly up by 0.2% to 61.10. Broader all shares index flat with an upward bias, a very slight one, up by 0.1% to 36.88. Taking a look at the sub-indices, the financials, holding firms, and property counters are limiting the market's advance. Now, total volume is at 2.31 billion shares, valued at 877 million pesos. Market breadth, almost neck and neck. We've got 64 advancers, 66 decliners, and 46 stocks unchanged. In the currencies markets, the peso opened at 57.88 against the dollar, up from its previous close of 57.95. On the corporate front, PhilWeb Corporation announces a 1.8 billion peso deal that may lead to a change in control at the company. In a disclosure, PhilWeb says Gregorio Araneta Incorporated, owned by Bilyonaryo Gregorio Araneta, the president's brother-in-law, signs a share purchase agreement with Nexora Holdings Incorporated and Velora Holdings Incorporated for the sale of its 57% stake, equivalent to 829 million common shares at 2 pesos and 17 centavos per piece. As the deal covers more than 35% of PhilWeb's outstanding voting shares, the buyers are required to conduct a mandatory tender offer to remaining shareholders. PhilWeb says that the transaction may increase foreign ownership up to 40%, but notes this complies with ownership rules since it's not engaged in nationalized activities. Now, another controversy is brewing at the Department of Information and Communications Technology. Veteran DICT employees have reportedly sent a letter to Senate President Tito Soto accusing Undersecretary Cristina Faye Condes Desagon of misconduct and bid rigging. Desagon, who serves as the Chief of Staff to DICT Secretary Henry Aguda, is also being accused of coercing staff to engage in questionable budget practices and sign documents against their will. The letter also links Desagon's protege, Region 1 Director June Vincent Manuel Gaudan, to Lancaster Technology and Development Philippines, a supplier involved in the 2.4 billion peso laptop deal of the Department of Education 3 years ago. The NC has reached out to Desagon and Gaudan for comment, but both have yet to reply. U.S. President Donald Trump nominates Lee Lipton as the next ambassador to the Philippines. The White House submits formally his nomination to the U.S. Senate on October 8th. Lipton currently serves as interim permanent representative to the U.S. mission to the Organization of American States, where he advances U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere. Lipton brings over 25 years of private sector experience, including leading a successful apparel business and owning high-volume restaurants in Florida. He will succeed Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson, who took office in July of 2022. Still in the U.S. President Donald Trump says Israel and Hamas have agreed on the first phase of a peace framework that would allow for the swift release of all hostages. Hamas confirms it has reached an agreement to end the war, including a hostage prisoner exchange and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. If implemented, the deal would bring both sides closer to any previous effort to end the conflict in Gaza. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Thank you for joining us, and keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel.